It begins not with an explosion but with silence, the kind of silence that settles before a seismic shift. Then, impact, a US military base, Kosovo struck by Iranian forces. But the missile wasn't just aimed at a target in the desert, it was aimed at the stability of the global order. What erupted wasn't merely a military escalation, it was a strategic move in a much bigger game. A game where bullets are announcements. She and powers broke far beyond on the battlefield. The world watched the smoke, but the wise watched the markets. The second that missile landed, oil futures surged. Diplomatic channels buzzed, but behind them, the halls of capital turned quietly. This wasn't just about retaliation. It was about leverage. About signaling strength without saying a word. And if you're only watching the headlines, you're missing the message entirely. Iran doesn't play the game like others. It doesn't rely on chaos for the sake of it. It calculates its times. It understands the rhythm of global dependency on oil, on trade routes, on balance. And it presses where the world is most vulnerable. Hitting a U.S. high base isn't just defining messaging. It's letting the powers be know we are not beneath the board. We're on it. Now ask yourself, what happens the next? Do governments fall into public rage and saber rattling? Possibly, but that's not where the real decisions are made. Behind closed doors, oil conglomerates, investment banks, and energy cartels are already repositioning. Where most see crisis, the elite see opportunity. Is a fog to the untrained, but to those who understand power, it is clarity. Supply chains will reroute. Insurance on Middle Eastern trade corridors will surge. Some companies will suffer, others will rise. Watch carefully who says nothing in this moment. They're usually the ones gaining the most. The people who control energy don't blink when a base is bombed. They plan. Because conflict doesn't break the economy, it reshapes it. And every reshaping makes new kings. Do not be fooled by loud voices. When global events erupt, the loudest are often the most lost. Real power works in whispers. And in this moment, the whispers are deafening. What you need to know is this: the world didn't just watch a missile hit a base. The world watched a new phase begin, one that we will redraw alliances, shift supply routes, and birth new centers of control. Iran has done more than attack. It has revealed fractures in the world order, and those fractures are where the bold build empires. You can either panic or you can perceive, because those who understand what is truly happening won't be watching from the sidelines, that they'll be shaping what happens next. Stay focused. Hot with the US door. Ask Kaya, what are the billion-dollar moves happening in silence? Because that's where the next chapter is already being written. And the people who know how to read that chapter, they won't just survive, they'll lead. War and wealth are old partners, dancing in quiet coordination while the rest of the world shouts about justice, retaliation, and diplomacy. But behind the scenes, every bullet has a price tag. Every missile a ripple effect, and every strike, like the one Iran just made on the US base, is calculated not only for impact, but for influence. When a military base is attacked, the world sees aggression. But the powerful see opportunity. They see shifting oil prices, rising demand for military contractors, emergency negotiations for supply routes, and a reshuffling of energy influence. This is not speculation, it's repetition. History tells us that markets are shaped more by the threat of war than by peace itself. Defense stocks rise, commodities tighten, and policymakers heavily invested in these systems use conflict as the lever to justify new spending, new alignments, and new deals. In times like these, media tells the public where to look, but the influential already know where to act. Corporations with reach into arms manufacturing, logistics, and private energy sectors don't wait to respond. They prepare before the missile even hits, here often because they understand that geopolitical moves are rarely random. They're planned, timed, controlled. The global reaction to Iran's strike will be more than military, it will be financial. And those who grasp this principle will be first to benefit. While the average person fears instability, those with vision position themselves for control. War does not only destroy, it reallocates power. Where weapons may fall silent, but the money never stops moving. And the true consequences of this strike will not be seen in the desert sand, but in the balance sheets of those who anticipated the shock and turned it into a strategy. The hidden players in this conflict are not standing at podiums or wearing uniforms. They are sitting in boardrooms, watching markets, analyzing patterns, and pulling strings from the shadows. When Iran struck the US base, every headline turned to military response. Counter observations were happening quietly among oil executives, banking elites, and international policymakers who understand that the battlefield is only one dimension of power. These individuals and institutions have no need to announce their presence. Their influence doesn't come from visibility, but from precision. They don't react to world events, they anticipate them. Long before a missile is fired, they've already assessed the risk, projected the outcomes, begun to shift their investments accordingly. This is not conspiracy, it is strategy. Every major geopolitical event becomes a pivot point. And the well-informed can ready if you are always ready to turn that pivot into profit. These are the people who shape global narratives, who use unrest as a lever to adjust currency flows, disrupt competitors, or secure energy deals in regions most would deem too unstable. They understand that fear in the public sphere often means leverage in the private one. When others pull back, they move forward. While national leaders manage optics, these players manage assets, and they are watching this conflict not with anxiety, but with calculation. Because every explosion is also an opening for negotiation, for influence, for restructuring. They do not see chaos, they see clarity. The illusion that war is only about nations and soldiers is a distraction. The truth is, global events of this scale are guided and redirected by the few who understand the long game. They may never be named in headlines, but their fingerprints are always on the outcome. Every act of war echoes to the global economy like a stone dropped into still water. The impact may begin with fire and smoke, but the ripples travel far into energy markets, supply chains, and some financial institutions. When Iran hit that US base, it didn't just challenge military dominance, it sent a shockwave through the arteries of global commerce. Oil prices immediately responded, and with them, the heartbeat of industries in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Why? Because energy isn't just fuel, it's leverage. It powers factories, fuels transportation, stabilizes or destabilizes me. Those who control energy don't just sell resources, they influence everything from inflation to foreign policy. This is where the real retaliation takes shape, not always in airstrikes or troop deployments, but in contracts, embargoes, and shifts in shipping routes. The financial world begins to restructure quietly, hedging risks, moving capital, securing assets in regions less affected. Banks become nervous. Investors become cautious, but the few who understand the pattern become bold. They know war inflates prices, draws government funding into defense sectors, and creates new dependencies. The wise aren't paralyzed by fear. They're prepared. They've studied past conflict. They've seen how the Gulf War rewrote the global oil order, how sanctions on nations like Russia changed Europe's gas lifeline. Now, with a single strike, reminded the world of how vulnerable modern systems truly are. The consequences won't be measured in bodies or speeches, but in barrels, bonds, and bottom lines. And as the media focuses on flags and threats, the truly powerful are focused on positioning, turning today's conflict into tomorrow's advantage. Because in every war, the wealth doesn't disappear. Hence, the real response to a military strike isn't always delivered through missile soldiers. Often, silence, crafted by advisors, signed in back rooms, and executed through financial systems. When Iran struck the US base, retaliation, but the true retaliation is far more complex and far more calculated. Sanctions may follow. Trade routes may be redirected. But these are not spontaneous attacks. They are strategic, rehearsed, and prepared long before any attack occurs. The most effective form of warfare in the modern world is not kinetic, but economic. And those who lead nations understand that crushing an enemy does not always require bullets on the ground. Sometimes it requires closing access to global financial markets, freezing assets, holding trade, or manipulating supply lines to bring an adversary to its knees. This is why the response to the strike won't be fully seen on news broadcasts. It will be felt in markets, in sudden inflation in one country, or in the collapse of exports in another. Diplomacy will take center stage publicly, but behind that curtain, economic warfare will rage. Corporations with global ties will lobby for favorable adjustments. Governments will recalibrate policies not to save face, but to protect profit. And throughout this process, intelligence agencies, central banks, and financial giants will coordinate actions that shape not just the next few weeks, but the next decade. Hey, this is the dimension of power that the average person rarely sees, but it is the one that determines whether nations rise, fall, or quietly transform. In this way, the real response has already begun though long before press conferences or military briefings. And it will be carried out not in one swift blow, but in hundreds of precise, invisible strokes. The strike on the US Carnus bases more than a confrontation between two nations. It's a catalyst for the reshaping of the global energy landscape. In a world still driven by fossil fuels, every disruption in the Middle East has consequences that stretch far beyond its borders. Iran, sitting at the heart of the world's most strategic oil corridors, they knows the true value of geography. Its strike wasn't just symbolic, it was economic, aimed at reminding the world of its relevance in global energy security. When instability erupts in this region, oil doesn't just become scarce, it becomes powerful. Countries that depend on steady flows from the Persian Gulf suddenly find themselves vulnerable. They look for alternatives. They reconsider their alliances. In doing so, they often end up making long-term decisions based on short-term fear. New pipelines are negotiated. Storage facilities are secured. Prices fluctuate, but more importantly, the control over supply begins to shift. Nations like China, India, and European powers begin to diversify energy sources, not just to survive, but to insulate themselves from similar shocks in the future. And in that reshuffling, new players rise while old ones must adapt or fade. Energy is more than fuel, it's influence. Control the tap and you control the thirst. Iran understands this principle. Do the oil giants, who will now use this crisis to renegotiate terms, increase margins, and lobby governments for more favorable trade conditions. What began as an act of aggression will evolve into a global economic strategy because energy isn't about lights turning on. It's about keeping nations running, industries moving, and economies breathing. And when that flow is, every decision that follows becomes a game of who can secure the future. First and most firmly, in every crisis, there's a storm, but inside that storm, for a certain kind of mind, there's clarity. The missile strike by Iran on the US base has thrown global media, politics, and public discourse into chaos. But for those who understand the patterns of history, this moment is not just a threat, it's an opening. Because in every geopolitical shakeup, a rare window appears, one that allows individuals, corporations, and even nations to reposition, restructure, and rise. When the world is distracted by headlines and fear, the strategic quietly get to work. They analyze the weakness in supply chains. They trace the ripple effect through currencies, commodities, and contracts. They see where value will collapse and where new value will be born. While fear drives most people to retreat, the bold lean in. They make decisions others are too panicked to see. They buy when the markets dip. They acquire what others are forced to sell. They use instability as a lever, not a roadblock. And this very moment, is rich with such leverage. The strike has created uncertainty, but with uncertainty comes the redistribution of influence. New leaders will emerge in energy, in defense, in diplomacy. New partnerships will be formed, some quietly, some publicly. And those who are watching closely will know how to align themselves with these emerging powers before the dust settles. Wise is not a time to wait, it is a time to move with purpose. Because while the noise of war and retaliation fills the air, the real game is happening in silence. And those who know how to navigate that silence will be the ones writing the rules when the next chapter begins. And so, what appeared at first glance to be the sudden act of war, a missile crashing into a US base, reveals itself as something far more calculated, far more consequential. It is a shift point in the global structure of power, a signal that we are no longer in the world we thought we understood. This is not merely a military event, it is a financial tremor, a geopolitical pivot, and a strategic test. The ones who will suffer are those who watch passively and who wait for governments to decide their fate. But those who rise, those who lead, are the ones who study this moment with clarity, who move while others freeze, and who listen to the quiet signals beneath the noise. The strike is over. The world is reacting. But the story is far from finished. That, in fact, has just begun. The question now is not whether another missile will fly, but who will understand the deeper consequences before they unfold. Because of this moment, like every moment of upheaval, is not just a warning, it is an invitation to see more clearly, to act more wisely, and to position yourself where others will later wish they had stood. Stay awake. Stay discerning, and above all, stay ahead.